Hello, devoted followers of OhMyEcon, and welcome to a new episode of our brand new podcast series. I'm your host, Anandini, a new member of the OhMyEcon family. Today, we have an in-depth conversation lined up, delving deep into the world of pharmaceutical pricing and drug affordability. Before we jump into the nitty-gritty of this complex topic, let me introduce our special guest, Aruzan, a student from the Biomed Society. Welcome, Arzan, and please introduce yourself.
So hello, everyone. My name is Aruzan. So I'm going to be here talking about the biomedical perspective. So I take both biology, chemistry, economics A levels. So I'm very excited to talk about this specific topic today.
Great to have you. As we begin with today's engaging discussion, let's take a moment to provide some context by addressing a fundamental question that some of our listeners might have in mind. Aruzan, for the sake of clarity, could you please explain what exactly the pharmaceutical industry is and what it encompasses?
The pharmaceutical industry plays a vital role in discovery, evolving, manufacturing, and marketing pharmaceutical drugs for the use of patients to either cure or vaccinate them. The pharmaceutical industry encapsulates all the companies around the world which perform in the above-mentioned activities. Pharmaceutical industries are the most crucial industries around the globe to cure diseases and conditions.
Thank you for that concise explanation. It's essential to have a clear understanding of the pharmaceutical industry's scope and significance as we explore complexities of today's topic. To set the stage for our conversation, let me share a real-world story with our listeners. Imagine a hard-working individual, let's call her Sarah, who has been diagnosed with a chronic illness. She is prescribed a medication that could significantly improve her quality of life. But there's a catch. The cost of this medication is exorbitant, and Sarah's insurance barely covers it. She's stuck in a dilemma between her health and her finances. Unfortunately, Sarah's story is not unique. High drug prices affect countless individuals around the world. Now, let's delve into the economics of pharmaceuticals, exploring the factors that influence drug pricing. Could you please walk us through some of these key economic factors?
So one of the key economic factors is patents and intellectual property rights. So pharmaceutical companies heavily rely on patents to protect their investment in R&D. So patents grant exclusive rights to sell a drug for a certain period, which could range from 10 to 20 years, sometimes even shorter than that. But usually it's 20 years. And after approval, it allows companies to recoup their R&D investments and earn profits. And usually once a drug patent expires, generic manufacturers can produce and sell equivalent versions at lower prices, leading to price competition, and that can dramatically reduce drug costs. However, what some companies do is they seek ways to extend their patent protection. So they make minor modifications to existing drugs, or they obtain additional patents for new uses, which is typically known as evergreening. So these patent protection rights and these intellectual property rights definitely increase the prices of drugs. So that is definitely one of the reasons why we have high drug prices. Also, one thing that is relevant to the pharmaceutical industry is the research and development costs. So in the pharmaceutical industry, we definitely see very high R&D costs. So developing a new pharmaceutical drug is extremely expensive, and it is extremely time-consuming, and costs typically include preclinical research, clinical trials, regulatory approvals, post-market surveillance, and according to estimates, it can cost over $2 billion just to bring a single drug to market. So as we can see, we can definitely observe extremely high R&D expenditures. And there's always a huge risk to this because many drug development projects fail during clinical trials. So that leads to a lot of wasted costs for pharmaceutical companies. And the high failure rate increases the costs of successful drug development in the pharmaceutical industry. As well as that, there's also regulations and price controls in the pharmaceutical industry. So governments often regulate drug prices through agencies like the FDA, for instance, in the United States, or the European Medicines Agency in the European Union. So they may also negotiate drug prices for public health programs. And some countries, they even implement price controls or reference pricing, limiting the amount of pharmaceutical companies can charge for drugs. So this can result in lower prices, but it may also reduce incentives for innovation.
Thank you for that explanation. Now let's turn our attention to the various stakeholders in the pharmaceutical industry. It's not just the drug makers, right? Can you elaborate on the key players and how they influence drug pricing?
Well, one thing that is relevant to, I think, all industry and economics. So we look at market dynamics. So the basic economic principles of supply and demand also apply to pharmaceutical, just like any other industry. So it depends on the availability of substitute, the prevalence of the condition, and consumer preferences. They all influence drug prices as well. And the concentration of pharmaceutical companies in the market can also affect pricing. So in markets dominated by a few large players, so also known as oligopolies, they may have more pricing power when it comes to that. And also when considering international price, so drug prices can vary significantly between countries due to differences in regulations, negotiation strategies, and economic conditions. So some patients tend to seek lower cost options through international imports. And that is what I wanted to say. Now, could you please tell me about pharmaceutical benefit managers and health insurance coverage?
So pharmaceutical benefit managers, also known as PBMs, act as intermediaries between insurance companies and pharmacies. They negotiate drug prices, manage formularies, and process prescription claims. And the insurance companies often negotiate drug prices with manufacturers on behalf of their policyholders. The level of coverage provided by insurance can significantly affect an individual's out-of-pocket expenses. PBMs and insurance companies play pivotal roles in drug pricing. PBMs negotiate with drug managers to secure favorable pricing for insurers and often create formularies which dictate which drugs are covered. Insurance companies, on the other hand, determine how much of the drug cost they will cover, leaving patients to pay the remaining balance. It's clear that stakeholders have a significant influence on the accessibility and affordability of medications. So now can we talk about the ethical dilemmas which arise from high drug prices? It's not just an economic issue, it's a moral one too. So what are some of the ethical concerns we should be aware of?
So one of the key concerns is access versus innovation. So high drug prices can be a barrier to access for many patients, potentially compromising their health and well-being. So the dilemma pits the need for affordable treatment against the desire to incentivize R&D for new and innovative drugs, because obviously firms that have the profit maximization objective would be incentivized to innovate. However, when it comes to drug prices, and this is specifically relevant for the pharmaceutical industry, the prices should remain adequate and affordable, as it definitely compromises the health and well-being of the population.
So now that we've addressed the pharmaceutical pricing and drug affordability, what do you think are some potential solutions for this problem?
I think one potential solution would be to be transparent. So the lack of transparency in drug prices and negotiations between pharmaceutical companies, insurance, and pharmacy benefit managers raise a lot of ethical questions about fairness and accountability. So I think governments and payers can negotiate drug prices more effectively if we see transparency, because obviously transparency in pricing and negotiation can ensure that fair prices are set and that companies are being held accountable. Also, another thing is reference pricing. It is already implemented in some countries, however, not all. So implementing reference pricing is where drug prices are benchmarked against those in other countries or regions, and they can help control costs and make medications more affordable. Also, we should have patent reform, so we should have strict regulations on patent extensions and evergreening to prevent pharmaceutical companies from extending monopolies and delaying generic competition. As well as that, we should also have research funding reforms and explore alternative funding mechanisms for drug R&D, such as public-private partnerships or increased government funding for critical research. We should also include price caps or controls. By implementing price controls or caps on essential medications, we could prevent excessive pricing. But this should definitely be carefully considered to avoid unintended consequences, because we obviously do not want to see consequences such as lack of innovation. But that is definitely one thing that we should definitely consider, as well as that we should also have broader healthcare system reforms in general. And also, one thing that is specifically relevant for the United States is we could see a transition to a single payer system, which can definitely address the issue of drug pricing by negotiating prices on a larger scale. But this is also another thing that should be carefully considered. That is all I wanted to say.
Before we wrap up our discussion today, I want to share a remarkable real-world development that has the potential to disrupt the pharmaceutical industry as we know it. Just recently, on 24th January 2022, billionaire investor Mark Cuban made headlines with a groundbreaking initiative. Cuban launched an online pharmacy for generic drugs under the name the Mark Cuban Cost Plus Drug Company. The key promise here is steep discounts over traditional drug distributors. This innovative online pharmacy aims to bypass the healthcare industry middlemen and helps consumers avoid high drug prices. They do this by charging manufacturers prices plus a flat 15% markup and a pharmacist fee. In essence, they're saying all drugs are priced at cost plus 15%. Mark Cuban's pharmacy is taking a proactive approach to negotiate drug prices directly with manufacturers, ultimately lowering cost for consumers. It's important to note that they don't accept health insurance, but they believe that their prices will still be lower than what people would pay at a traditional pharmacy. The website currently offers 100 generic drugs to treat a variety of illnesses, including diabetes, asthma, and heart conditions. To put this into perspective, one drug for diabetes patients, metformin, sells for just $3.90 for a 30-day supply at Cuban's pharmacy, compared to a retail price of $20, and a 30 count of a medicine used to treat leukemia and other cancers go for as low as $17.10 at Cuban's pharmacy, compared to an astonishing $2,500 at other pharmacies. It's incredible to see such a bold move aimed at addressing the problem of high drug costs in the US. This initiative underscores the urgent need for action to expand access to essential medications for those who need them most. Now, Arjan will also be diving into a similar case study.
So one case study that I wanted to touch on is the case when Johnson & Johnson shared a license for a tuberculosis drug after a novelist's viral campaign. So millions of people are set to gain access to an affordable generic version of the life-saving drug bedaquiline for drug-resistant tuberculosis. So the pharmaceutical company Johnson & Johnson, also known as J&J, recently allowed the production of the inexpensive generics for this patented TB drug in several low and middle income countries, potentially costing just $8 per month. So the decision came after a campaign led by John Green, a popular YouTube personality and novelist who called out Johnson & Johnson for maintaining high prices through patent evergreening. And While the online campaign definitely garnered a lot of attention, insiders suggested the agreement was primarily the result of ongoing negotiations. So Johnson & Johnson's global patent for bedaquiline ended in July, but the company had maintained control over the drug in low-income countries using secondary patents. However, the July agreement now allows nonprofit organizations like the Stop TB partnership to supply affordable generics to 44 countries, reducing the cost barrier to accessing this vital medication.
It's stories like this that give us hope for a more affordable and equitable healthcare system. We wrap up today's episode of the OhMyEcon podcast. We've explored the intricate world of pharmaceutical pricing, delved into the roles of various stakeholders, and discussed the ethical dilemmas surrounding high drug prices. We've also looked at potential solutions and even celebrated a real-world initiative aimed at making medications more affordable. Thank you, Arzan, for joining me today, and a big thank you to all our listeners for tuning in. Remember, understanding the complexities of pharmaceutical economics is the first step towards finding solutions and making a positive change. Stay tuned for more engaging discussions on economic topics that matter. Until next time, keep those ideas flowing, those conversations going.